The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the grand city of Zarnath. The city was bustling with activity, as it always was. The streets were filled with traders, merchants, and travelers from all across the Zenthi Empire. Their voices mingled in the air, creating a constant hum that seemed to fill every corner of the vast marketplace. On the edge of the market stood a small alien girl. Her name was Lisra. She was not like the other aliens around her. Her people were rare, their species known for their delicate frames and quiet demeanor. Unlike the towering, muscular beings who dominated the planet, Lisra was small, almost fragile in comparison. Her eyes were a soft shade of green, her skin smooth and pale, almost like the surface of the moon on a cloudless night. She had long, flowing hair that shimmered in the sunlight, but she kept it tied back in a simple knot. Lisra was often overlooked by the busy crowds. In a city where power and strength were the true measures of value, she was nothing more than a shadow, insignificant and weak. But in her heart, she had dreams of something more. She had hopes that one day she would be able to stand proud, not for her size or strength, but for her courage and intelligence. As she walked through the crowded marketplace, trying to stay out of the way of the larger, more powerful beings around her, a voice broke through the noise. It was a harsh, mocking tone that made Lisra flinch. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The voice came from behind her, and Lisra froze, knowing exactly who it belonged to. Zorak, a towering Zenthi warrior, was the one who had spoken. He was one of the most arrogant beings in Zarnath, known for his cruelty and condescending attitude toward anyone he deemed weaker than himself. Lisra turned slowly, keeping her head bowed, her heart pounding in her chest. Zorak stood tall, his broad chest puffed out with pride. His deep voice rang out again, this time aimed at the small girl before him. "What is this, a child? Shouldn't you be playing with your toys or something?" He chuckled to himself, clearly amused by his own words. His friends, a group of equally imposing Zenthi warriors, laughed along with him. Lisra didn't speak. She couldn't. She had learned long ago that words could do little to defend against the cruelty of others. Instead, she kept her gaze on the ground, trying to ignore the growing humiliation that burned in her cheeks. Zorak took a step closer, his shadow falling over her like a dark cloud. "I bet you can't even lift a weapon. How pathetic," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He reached down, grabbing Lisra's arm and pulling her up so she was forced to face him. His grip was strong and she winced as his fingers dug into her skin. "Let go of me," Lisra whispered, her voice barely audible. Zorak laughed again. "What's the matter? Too weak to even speak properly? How can you even walk around this city without being laughed at?" The crowd that had gathered around them watched in silence. Some of the onlookers snickered, while others simply shook their heads, too afraid to intervene. It wasn't uncommon for the strong to bully the weak in Zarnath. It was how things had always been, and it was how things would always be. Lisra's chest tightened with a mixture of fear and frustration. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to show any sign of weakness. But as Zorak's mocking words continued, she felt a knot form in her throat. Her hands trembled, but she kept them by her sides, refusing to let him see how much his taunts affected her. Zorak, seeing her trembling, smirked even wider. "There it is. I knew you'd break eventually. It's not hard to see that you're nothing but a joke." He finally released her arm, pushing her roughly away from him. Lisra stumbled back but managed to catch herself before she fell. Her face burned with shame, but she didn't cry. She couldn't. The words from earlier echoed in her mind. Weak, pathetic, joke. She didn't want to be any of those things, but before she could retreat into the safety of the crowd, another voice interrupted. Enough. It wasn't loud, but the command in the voice was clear. Zorak's eyes narrowed. and he turned, seeing who had spoken. A human soldier standing at the edge of the crowd was walking toward them. The human was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform simple but well-maintained. His eyes locked on Zorak, and for a brief moment there was an unmistakable air of authority about him. "Who are you to tell me what to do, human?" Zorak sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "This is none of your business." The human soldier didn't flinch. "It's my business when you're bullying someone weaker than you." The crowd fell silent, stunned by the human's boldness. Zorak, for all his strength and size, was known to be a fearsome warrior, not someone anyone would want to challenge. Yet here was a single human soldier, standing up to him without hesitation. "I'm not interested in your games," the human continued, his voice steady. "Let her go." Lisra looked up in surprise, her heart racing. She had never seen a human before, let alone one standing up to a Zenthi warrior. She didn't know who this soldier was, but there was something about him, a strength in his eyes, a calmness in his demeanor, that made her feel safer. Zorak took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can stop me? You, a weak, puny human?" The soldier's face remained impassive. "I don't need to fight you to stop you. Just walk away. Now!" Zorak hesitated, his pride clearly wounded by the human's calm challenge. He had been humiliated by a human before. It had taken him by surprise, and it made him angrier than he cared to admit. But after a long pause, Zorak grunted in frustration. "You're lucky today, human. But don't think this is over." With that, the warrior turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving Lisra standing in the middle of the marketplace. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the whispers continued. The human soldier had stood up to Zorak, something no one had done in years. Lisra remained frozen, still processing what had just happened. She hadn't expected anyone to defend her, especially not a human. But the soldier had done just that. He had stepped in when no one else had, and for the first time in a long while, Lisra felt a spark of hope. She wasn't completely alone. In this world, the human soldier didn't stay for the crowd's reactions. He turned and walked away as well, disappearing into the busy streets of Zarnath. But Lisra couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Her heart still pounded, but not from fear. She felt something else, something stronger. She wasn't worthless. She wasn't weak. And maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who believed in her. The next day, Lisra woke early, the sunlight filtering through the windows of her small home. She lay still for a few moments, her thoughts drifting back to the events of the previous day. Zorak's cruel words, his mocking laughter, they all seemed to echo in her mind. But there was something else she couldn't stop thinking about. The human soldier who had stood up for her. His calm presence, his strength without aggression, it was something she had never experienced before. In a world where strength was everything, the human had shown her that kindness and courage could be just as powerful. Lisra dressed quietly, putting on a simple tunic and making her way to the market. She didn't expect much to change today. The people would still look at her the same way, with pity or disdain. But she felt different. Something had shifted inside her. She had been humiliated, yes, but she had also been protected, even if just for a moment. And that made all the difference. The marketplace was as busy as always. The air was thick with the scents of foreign spices, roasted meats, and the noise of haggling merchants. Lisra moved through the crowd, trying to stay out of the way of the larger, stronger beings around her. But as she passed through, she noticed that there was a slight shift in the way the people looked at her. Some turned their heads. Others gave her respectful nods. It was subtle, but it was there. For the first time, Lisra didn't feel like she was invisible. She made her way to the back of the market, where the quieter stalls were located. She often came here to browse the small trinkets and fabrics the merchants sold. Today, she felt a strange sense of peace. She paused in front of a stall displaying intricate jewelry made from silver and stone. The patterns were delicate, just like her. She reached out, running her fingers over the cool metal, admiring the craftsmanship. As she lingered there, a familiar voice broke her concentration. "You look different today." Lysra turned, startled to see the human soldier from the day before, standing beside her. He had a friendly smile on his face, his posture relaxed, as though there was no tension in the air at all. Lysra blinked, unsure of how to respond. Why was he speaking to her? He was a human, and she was just an alien, but for some reason, the kindness in his eyes made her feel comfortable. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice still a bit uncertain. I don't know why. I guess I'm just trying to feel better." The human nodded, his smile warm. "That's good. You should. No one deserves to be treated the way you were yesterday. It wasn't right." Lysra didn't know what to say. She had been so used to people looking down on her, making her feel small, that she didn't know how to respond to such kind words. It was strange to her, but it also felt good. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'm James," the soldier continued, holding out his hand. "I'm here on a peacekeeping mission. I've been stationed here for a while now." Lysra hesitated for a moment before reaching out and shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but there was no force behind it, only kindness. "Lysra," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nice to meet you, Lysra," James said. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. It wasn't just about you standing up to Zorak, it was about how you carried yourself afterward. You didn't back down. That takes strength. You should be proud of that." Lysra felt her cheeks flush at the compliment. "I don't feel strong," she admitted, looking down at her feet. "I've never been strong." "Not like them," she said, nodding toward a group of imposing Zenthi warriors across the street. James followed her gaze. The Zenthi warriors were known for their strength, their towering figures and hardened armor. They were the epitome of power in the Zenthi Empire, and Lysra had spent her whole life comparing herself to them, always feeling lacking. "Strength isn't just about muscle," James said, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes it's about holding your ground, even when you're scared. It's about not letting the world push you around." Lysra thought about his words for a moment, the weight of them sinking in. She had always been afraid, always hiding in the shadows, trying to stay unnoticed. But yesterday, when Zorak had mocked her, she hadn't run away. She hadn't let his words break her. Maybe James was right. Maybe strength wasn't just about how you looked or how much you could lift. The next few days passed quietly, but Lysra found herself thinking about James more than she expected. His words kept echoing in her mind. She began to notice things she hadn't seen before, like how the people in the market treated her with a little more respect, as if they'd heard what happened with Zorak and the human soldier, or how some of the Zenthi warriors now gave her a nod of acknowledgement, no longer seeing her as just an insignificant, weak alien. But not everyone was so easily swayed. One afternoon, as Lysra was walking through the market, she saw Zorak again. This time he was with a group of his friends, laughing loudly as they made their way through the crowd. When he saw her, his eyes narrowed, and a smirk curled on his lips. "Well, well," Zorak's voice boomed across the street. "If it isn't the little girl who thinks she's something special." Lysra's heart sank as he approached her, his group of warriors following closely behind. She wanted to turn and run, to escape from the fear and humiliation she knew would come. But something inside her held her still. She remembered James's words. Strength is about holding your ground. Zorak stopped in front of her, towering over. her with his broad shoulders and mocking expression. "What's this, Lysra? Are you still pretending to be important?" he sneered. Lysra took a deep breath and lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "I'm not pretending," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it before. "I'm not afraid of you." Zorak's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise passing through them. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. It wasn't what he had expected. He was used to seeing fear in the eyes of those he mocked. But Lysra wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. Before he could speak, a voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here, Zorak?" James appeared from behind Lysra, stepping between her and the Zenthi warrior with a calm, almost bored expression. The Zenthi warriors around Zorak fell silent, and even Zorak himself seemed momentarily stunned by James's sudden presence. Zorak's smirk faltered, and he straightened up. "This doesn't concern you, human," he growled. James didn't flinch. "Actually, it does. You've been bothering her for days. I'm getting tired of seeing it." Lysra watched in awe as James stood there, facing Zorak with no fear, no hesitation. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was alone. There was someone there who cared, someone who was willing to stand with her. Zorak stared at James for a moment, then shook his head, as if dismissing the human soldier entirely. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, turning and walking away. His warriors followed behind, casting a final glance at Lysra, but none of them spoke. Lysra stood in silence, her heart racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear. She looked up at James, who had already turned back to her with a smile. "You didn't back down, did you?" he said, his voice warm with pride. Lysra smiled for the first time in days. "No, I didn't." The days following the encounter with Zorak passed quickly, each one feeling like a quiet battle. Lysra had been walking through the streets of Zarnath with a new sense of strength, a quiet pride that came from standing up for herself. She couldn't help but smile each time she remembered James's words. He had stood by her when no one else would, had spoken for her when she didn't have the courage to speak for herself. And now, she was beginning to believe that maybe she was worth defending. Maybe she was worth something after all. However, Zorak's words still lingered in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way he mocked her existence, made her wonder if it was all just temporary. Could she really change the way people saw her? Was her strength enough to last? Or would she eventually break under the pressure of being weak in a world that worshipped power? It wasn't long before she had another chance to prove herself. One afternoon, as Lysra wandered through the market, lost in thought, she felt the familiar, uneasy sensation of someone watching her. She turned to find a group of Zenthi warriors standing in a circle, their eyes fixed on her. They weren't just any Zenthi, though. They were part of the elite group that served as Zarnath's enforcers. These warriors were known for their ruthless nature, for their ability to make people disappear without anyone asking questions. Lysra's stomach twisted with fear, but she refused to back down. She had learned a valuable lesson from her previous encounters with Zorak. No matter how big or powerful they were, they could not take her strength if she refused to give it up. The leader of the group, a tall and muscular warrior named Varek, stepped forward. His eyes, like two burning embers, glinted with a cruel sense of amusement. "Well, well," he said in a voice that was as cold as steel. "If it isn't the little alien who thinks she's special." Lysra stood her ground, her heart racing, but her face a mask of calm. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to fight." Varek laughed, the sound echoing in the crowded market. "Fight?" he mocked. "Who said? Anything about a fight? You're just a little insect, and we're going to crush you beneath our boots." Lysra swallowed hard, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze with defiance. She might not be able to defeat them with strength, but she could show them she wasn't afraid. She could stand tall in the face of their mockery. Varric took another step toward her, and his warriors followed. "I've seen your kind before," he sneered. "You're nothing. Just a weak, pathetic creature pretending to be something you're not." Before Lysra could respond, a voice rang out, clear and authoritative. "Leave her alone." James appeared, walking swiftly through the crowd toward the group of warriors. His eyes were locked on Varric, his expression calm but unwavering. He wasn't looking for a fight, but it was clear he wasn't going to let this stand. Varric turned to face him, narrowing his eyes. "What do you want, human?" he growled, sizing James up. The Zenthi warriors around him chuckled, amused by the boldness of a single human standing against them. "I want you to stop bullying her," James said, his voice steady and firm. "She's done nothing to deserve this." Varric's eyes flickered with surprise, but his sneer didn't falter. "This is none of your business," he said. "She's just a weak alien. She's beneath us." James didn't flinch. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "No one is beneath anyone. You've been picking on the wrong person for too long." Lysra watched the exchange, her heart beating faster with each passing second. She had never seen anyone stand up to the Zenthi warriors like this before. She had never seen anyone stand up for her. But James wasn't just standing up for her. He was challenging everything the Zenthi believed in: their arrogance, their sense of superiority, and their idea of strength. Varric's lip curled into a snarl. "You think you can stop us?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. James didn't hesitate. "I don't need to stop all of you," he said, his voice cold. "I just need you to realize that you can't treat people like this. You can't bully the weak and expect no consequences." The warriors around Varric seemed unsure, their gazes flickering between their leader and James. Varric himself seemed momentarily taken aback. He wasn't used to being confronted, especially not by a human, but his pride refused to let him back down. "You've got a lot of nerve, human," he said, taking a step closer to James. "Maybe I should teach you a lesson." James didn't move. He stood his ground, unwavering. "I'm not here to fight you, Varric. I'm just here to stop you from hurting her." For a long moment, there was silence. The crowd around them had begun to gather, sensing the tension in the air. The warriors looked to Varric for a sign, but he didn't seem to know what to do. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who made others cower before him. But here was a human, a species he had always considered beneath him, standing up to him without fear. It was something he wasn't prepared for. Finally, Varric let out a frustrated growl. "This isn't over," he said, turning on his heel and signaling for his warriors to follow him. "We'll be watching you." As the group of Zenthi warriors walked away, Lysra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were trembling, but she forced herself to steady them. She had faced Zorac's cruelty, and now she had faced Varric's threats. But with James there, she hadn't felt as powerless as she once did. James turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lysra nodded, though she could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm fine," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you." James smiled. "I told you. No one deserves to be treated like that." Lysra smiled back, the warmth of his kindness spreading through her. "I never thought anyone would stand up for me," she said softly. "I've always been so small, so weak. I thought no one would care." James shook his head. "Size doesn't matter. Strength isn't just about muscle or power. It's about who you are inside. And you, Lysra, you have more strength than most people I know." Lysra's heart fluttered at his words. She wasn't sure what had changed in her since meeting James, but something had shifted. She no longer felt so small. She no longer felt so invisible. "Thank you," she said again, her voice a little stronger this time. James nodded, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "Anytime," he said. "But remember this, don't ever let anyone tell you you're not enough. You're stronger than you think." As they stood there in the middle of the market, surrounded by the noise and bustle of the city, Lysra realized something. She had always believed that power was something you had to be born with. She had always believed that the strong were the ones who got ahead, the ones who mattered. But now she understood that strength was something you could build, something you could choose to find within yourself. And with a little help from those who cared, it was something she could carry with her, no matter where life took her. The journey ahead was still uncertain. The Zenthi would not forget their humiliation, and there were many more battles to come. But for the first time in a long time, Lysra felt ready. She was ready to face whatever came her way, with or without the help of others. And maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to make her own place in the world. Lysra had never known peace in the way she did now. Every day felt like a victory, even the small moments when she didn't have to shrink away in fear. It wasn't just the change in how the people around her treated her, it was something deeper. Something inside her had shifted, and with it, a quiet strength had begun to blossom. Each time she walked through the streets of Zarnath, she held her head a little higher. And when she crossed paths with Zorak or the other Zenthi warriors, she didn't feel the weight of their mockery crushing her spirit. She felt the power of her own resilience. James had been a steady presence in her life since that day in the market when he had stood up to Varek and his warriors. Each day, they met, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design. But they always spoke, always shared a quiet understanding. James was no longer just the human soldier who had defended her. He had become her friend, a quiet guide through the storm of her doubts. Lysra began to see the world differently, to see herself differently. She no longer just existed in the shadows, waiting to be pushed aside. She began to take notice of the people around her, those who looked at her with pity, those who avoided her altogether, and those who didn't see her at all. The realization that she had always been so small in their eyes didn't hurt as much anymore. She had spent her entire life trying to please people who didn't even see her worth. But now, she knew that her worth didn't come from their approval. It came from within. She continued to walk through the marketplace each day, her steps more confident than before. She still avoided the larger groups of Zenthi, knowing that Zorak and his followers were never far away. But when she saw them now, she didn't lower her gaze. She simply walked past, unaffected by the contempt in their eyes. It wasn't easy, but each day it became a little easier to ignore the weight of their stares. One day, as she walked past the familiar stalls, she saw something that caught her attention. It was a small jewelry stand, its table cluttered with colorful beads and delicate trinkets. A woman was there, carefully arranging the display, her movements slow and deliberate. Lysra paused, drawn by the craftsmanship of the pieces. The woman noticed her watching and smiled warmly. "You have a good eye," the woman said, her voice gentle. "These are my finest pieces." Lysra smiled shyly. "They're beautiful. Would you like to learn how to make them?" the woman asked. Her eyes sparkled with an enthusiasm that Lysra hadn't expected. Lysra blinked in surprise. "Learn? But I don't know how." The woman nodded, understanding her hesitation. "It's not about knowing how. It's about learning, growing, and finding your own rhythm. You might surprise yourself." Lysra felt a sudden rush of excitement at the thought. For so long, she had been unsure of where she fit in this world. But here, in this quiet moment, she felt the stirrings of something new. She could try. She could learn. "I'd like that," Lysra said softly, her voice tinged with excitement, and so she began. Every afternoon after her work in the market, she spent hours with the woman, learning how to thread beads, craft designs, and bring her imagination to life with her hands. It wasn't just about making jewelry, it was about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost long ago. As she worked, she found a kind of peace in the steady rhythm of her hands, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The more she worked, the more she discovered about herself, her patience, her creativity, her ability to craft something beautiful from nothing. Over time, her skills grew, and with them, so did her confidence. She started to see herself in a new light, no longer as a weak, small girl in the shadows, but as someone capable of creating, capable of standing tall. And when she sold her first piece of jewelry at the market, the pride she felt wasn't just about the money. It was about her own growth, her own journey. One afternoon, as Lysra was finishing up a new design, she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned, a smile forming on her lips before she even saw who it was. James stood there looking as relaxed as ever, his hands in his pockets. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice light. Lysra's smile grew. "I'm getting better," she said, her voice filled with the pride of someone who had come so far in such a short time. "I've sold a few pieces already," James grinned. "I knew you'd get there. You've got a gift, Lysra. Not just for jewelry, but for resilience. It's something I admire." Lysra looked down at her hands, feeling a flush of warmth at his words. "It's not always easy," she admitted, her voice soft. "There are times when I still feel small, when I still wonder if I'm enough." James stepped closer, his expression serious. "You are enough," he said firmly. "You've always been enough. It's just about seeing it yourself. That's the hardest part." Lysra felt something stir inside her at his words. It wasn't just the reassurance he gave her. It was the truth of it. She had spent so long believing that her value depended on others' opinions, on their approval. But the reality was that her worth had always been hers alone. The next few weeks brought new challenges, but they also brought new victories. Lysra continued to grow in confidence, both in her craft and in herself. She began to notice the world around her with a clearer perspective. When Zorak or his warriors passed by, she no longer felt a rush of fear in her chest. Instead, she stood tall, her chin lifted and her gaze steady. The change was subtle at first, but it was there. And it wasn't just in her posture. It was in the way she carried herself. She had stopped looking for approval from others. She had stopped seeking validation from those who didn't care about her. One day, as she was walking through the market, she spotted Zorak in the distance. He was with a group of Zenthi warriors, laughing loudly as they made their way through the crowds. The moment she saw him, she felt a familiar knot in her stomach. But this time, it was different. She didn't feel the overwhelming need to avoid him, to shrink away in fear. Instead, she took a deep breath and kept walking, her steps steady and sure. Zorak noticed her as she approached. His eyes narrowed, and he sneered as she walked by. "Still pretending to be important, little alien?" he taunted. Lysra didn't flinch. She didn't look down. She didn't even slow her pace. She simply kept walking, her head held high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of his words, but it didn't matter. She wasn't that person anymore. She wasn't the one who had once shrunk in fear. She was strong, and she knew it. To her surprise, Zorak didn't say anything else. He didn't follow her, didn't call her names, didn't try to mock her. He simply stood there, watching her walk away. And when she looked over her shoulder, a moment later she saw that he was gone, his group of warriors following behind him, their laughter fading into the distance. Lysra smiled to herself, a quiet sense of pride swelling in her chest. She hadn't needed anyone to fight her battles. She hadn't needed anyone to defend her. She had done it herself. And in that moment, she realized something important. She had never truly been weak. She had only believed she was. The next time she met James, she shared her success with him, her smile wide and genuine. "I didn't back down," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. James nodded, his expression proud. "I knew you wouldn't. You're stronger than you realize." Lysra smiled, looking down at her hands. She had spent so long doubting herself, wondering if she could ever truly change. But now she knew she could. She had already begun the journey, and there was no turning back. She was ready to face whatever came next, not as a small, weak alien, but as someone who knew her worth and who was finally willing to stand up for it.